Tonight, it's another NFL mock draft post free agency, but this time with some trades. Hey guys, I'm Joshua Klein. I'm the host of the Draft Beard podcast. Welcome in tonight. We're going to have some fun with another mock draft. This time, we're going to throw in some trades. Trading happens in the real life NFL draft, and I think this year we could see a lot of trades. If you look at draft boards, there is not a lot of consensus. If you look at consensus draft boards like on The Athletic and maybe mock draft database, really, those are just taking the average of where you see players. But if you really look at different mock drafts, there are players who are all over the board, like a player like Kelvin Banks going maybe in the top 10 or the back of the second round. Players like Mike Green or Shamar Stewart. You see him mocks in the top 10. You see him way back at the end of the draft. Safeties like Nick Emanwari, middle of the first round to not even drafted in the first round. The only thing that we kind of see for certain, the top 4 picks, they kind of seem to be around the same from mock draft to mock draft. So let's have some fun and get started tonight with our mock draft. And we're going to go ahead and get it going right away with the Tennessee Titans. So let's get this mock draft started with Cam Ward going number 1 overall. And I don't think that Tennessee is going to be trading out of that pick right now. A lot can change over the next month, but I think we're kind of locked into either Tennessee is taking Cam Ward number 1 or somebody is going to trade up to number 1. I think the actions of the Giants are kind of saying the same thing as well. So Cam Ward goes number 1, which leaves us at pick 2. Now, do the actions of the Giants, do they put a little symbol into or predict that the Browns are going to take Shedeur Sanders and they're going to be left holding the bag with no quarterback here at the top of the draft? Maybe. That's a possibility. And then Myles Garrett has come out and said that you can't win with and be a great team or win without having a good quarterback. Again, he's not wrong. It's a quarterback-driven league, which is why the players that maybe aren't top 10, top 20 on a lot of people's draft boards, quarterbacks will get bumped up the board. But in this case, I think that the Cleveland Browns have a chance here to take an area of their team and just make it dominant. You already have Myles Garrett. I think you take Abdul Carter too, and kind of live with what you have at quarterback right now, or maybe you can take a couple swings later in the draft and some of these quarterbacks who are seen as maybe not franchise quarterbacks, but maybe one of them could hit. Take a couple swings at these guys who might have long careers as backups, but maybe you find one of these who turn out to be a good NFL quarterback, and maybe you hit on the Brock Purdy or the Jalen Hurts type in this draft. So I think taking Abdul Carter at number 2 makes a lot of sense for the Cleveland Browns and just make an area of that team so strong. People forget 2 years ago, the Browns made the playoffs. They had a dominant defense. I think you just keep making that defense dominant, take the best player available. That leaves us to the Giants. Now, do the Giants take Shedeur Sanders here, or do they go in another direction? I and a lot of people are not convinced that Shedeur Sanders is a franchise-type quarterback. I think he can be a good, serviceable NFL quarterback. Yes, he's accurate, right? He needs to learn to not hang on to the ball. Maybe some of that was due to the terrible offensive line of the Colorado Buffaloes. But in this case, I'm going to go and just solidify an area of need with the Giants here, with wide receiver and the guy who can play cornerback. Travis Hunter is basically a 1 of 1. Take the best player available, unless you are sitting there and you had a player that a lot of people viewed as a franchise quarterback, right? If you're sitting there and you have a Drake May type quarterback, this isn't even a discussion. You're going to take the quarterback. The Giants probably would have been in a better position if they would have taken one of those quarterbacks last year, like J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, Bo Nix. But look, hindsight's always 20/20, but in this case, we're going to go with Travis Hunter to the New York Giants. That brings us to pick 4. With the big 3 players, or the big 2 defensive players off of the board, do you look at it maybe a Myles Graham here at 4, or do you look at offensive line? I think in this scenario, I'm going to go with one that I saw Trevor Sikkema do on one of his mock drafts, and that is have the San Francisco 49ers trade up here. San Francisco has a dire need for interior defensive line. We all know that it looks like Miles Graham has been Mason Graham has been penciled in here to the Jacksonville Jaguars at pick 5. So if anybody wants a player like Mason Graham, despite some of the size stuff that came out during the pre-draft process, they're going to have to jump in front of Jacksonville. So in this case, I had San Francisco sending pick 11 for pick 4. To get up there, they use pick 43. That's their second round pick at pick 43. They send pick 400, and then they come in and they send a 5th round pick in next year's draft to move up to number 4. That's a lot of draft capital, but this is what San Francisco, I could see them doing, right? They got Robert Saleh back. John Lynch likes to be aggressive. They've had some injury concerns this last season that moved a really good team up the draft board and a team that maybe shouldn't have been there. Though they do have a lot of holes now. Their team's kind of getting a little decimated and with free agency and injuries. So in this case, I'm going to have San Francisco move up, get the impact defensive tackle here by selecting Mason Graham at 4. That now leaves Jacksonville in a predicament here. What did they do? What do they need? They need some offensive line help. They need help in a lot of spots in their roster, but that leaves an opening now for them to trade down. One of the guys that really would have helped solidify their team here and one of the, I believe, blue chip players in this draft is Mason Graham. I think a lot of people are starting to think that it's a strong possibility that the Raiders may be in play for Ashton Jeanty. What teams would like to come up for I believe, the 4th of 4 blue chip players in this draft? And Ashton Jeanty is that last blue chip player. Even though positional value may not be the best picking a running back in the top 10, but Ashton Jeanty is an Emmitt Smith style prospect, one of the best running back prospects to come around in a while, maybe since Adrian Peterson, Bijan Robinson. So I think a team comes up and trades for them. Who would that be? Would it be Dallas trying to come up from 12? A lot of teams that could need running back. I don't see the Saints using that draft capital. I think there's one team out there who could make a trade, and that's going to be the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears have been ultra aggressive. They've now got Ben Johnson as their offensive coordinator. I think they go and let's just grab them, who is the best player on the board, and not risk letting him fall to him at 10 and trade up 5 spots to guarantee themselves Ashton Jeanty, who would be an absolute home run for them. And so I have Chicago and Jacksonville here working out a trade where Chicago sends pick 41 and their 7th round pick here, I think it was 233, for Jacksonville's 5th round pick. And then Jacksonville also sends back, let's see if I got that, pick 88. I did use the Rich Hill draft trade chart to kind of make this happen. I went and looked and did this, and I also had them throwing in a 6th round pick next year as well. So Jacksonville will be moving up 47 spots in day 2, pick up a late pick and a late pick next year. And Chicago moves up to number 5 in this draft. Come on, let's go. Doesn't want to force the trade here. Keeps wanting to select a player. All right. So we're going to force that trade. That puts Chicago on the clock to draft Ashton Jeanty at pick number 5. Now that leaves the Raiders at pick 6. They need a running back. They need a wide receiver. They need a corner. They need some help on the defensive interior. Honestly, they could use a pick at all 3 levels of their defense. So who do they go with here? They're sitting at pick 6. Do they look to scramble and maybe trade out, or do they take one of their best players available? And I think it's kind of typical what the Raiders do, despite that now Pete Carroll is here. And I think they take Ted McMillan at pick 6. That puts the New York Jets on the clock. The Jets, obviously, they need a quarterback. They could go with Shedeur Sanders here. He would be the best quarterback on the board. Wide receiver is a need. Defensive tackle, defensive interior. Obviously, Mason Graham's off the board. He's not a consideration. I don't see a Derek Harmon, Walter Nolan, any of those types. Kenneth Grant going at 7. I think they look here and they take the best right tackle here, and they go with Armand Membu the tackle out of Missouri. That puts Carolina on the clock. Now, Carolina needs at wide receiver. Tet's off the board. They need edge rusher. They could get the second best edge rusher, whoever they feel that is, on the board right now. Defensive back, you could look at Will Johnson, Jahadae Barron. So there's a lot of places they could go. Tight end, you could take Tyler Warren here. But sitting at pick 8, I think what happens here, not what happens, but a scenario that I could see here is the New England Patriots traded down, but they just saw the first offensive tackle go off the board. So I have New England. They move back up in this situation. They're going to send pick 11 and move up 3 spots to pick 8. To do that, New England will send pick 77 they got from Atlanta. They send 7th round pick 220, and Carolina sends back pick 74, I believe. No, sorry. 5th round pick 140. I don't know. I wrote all these down just so I could get them straight before I did this draft. So pick 140. So pick 11 and pick 77 and 220. And Carolina sends back pick 140. So now they drop down from 8 to 11. New England trades back up to guarantee themselves an offensive lineman, and they take Will Campbell. Drake May has got to be protected, so I go with Will Campbell. New Orleans is now sitting here on the clock. They need a quarterback. They need running back, wide receiver, defensive line. They kind of just need a lot of spots. Would there be a player here that teams are willing to come up for? Again, it could be the quarterback. But in this case, I had the New Orleans Saints looking at edge rusher. I think getting one of the top edge rushers here and going with Michael Williams, the big edge rusher out of Georgia, going to the New Orleans Saints. Now that brings us to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who lost out on Mason Graham with the San Francisco 49ers moving up. Now that puts them on the clock. They could be a spot here for Tyler Warren, maybe one of the first other wide receivers here in that next tier, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden. If you have Luther Burden there, one of these guys. Safety, I don't think they would go with Malachi Starks. Again, they do have a really good need at defensive interior, which they passed on. In this case, I think they end up taking, in my little exercise here, I have them taking Kelvin Banks Jr., the tackle, which brings us back to the Carolina Panthers. And the Panthers traded down 3 spots, picked up some extra picks here. They still have some need at edge, and they're still going to get the pick of the litter here at edge or that second tier of wide receivers. They, again, still have Tyler Warren on the board, but I think looking at the NFL values this guy much higher than I do, and that's Jalen Walker out of Georgia. So, that's right. They have him still listed under linebacker. So Jalen Walker, he could be a really good edge rusher. I don't see him really playing that well in that role at linebacker and at the NFL level. I think he's a better edge rusher. You could use him at times as that Sam or outside linebacker. So I have Carolina going with Jalen Walker. Again, NFL teams, again, this is one of those players that there's a wide discrepancy with where you see him. You see some analysts who will have him in their top 10, maybe as high as 5. You have others like me who have him back end of the first round. I have a second round grade on him. I just struggle with people. I think I've learned my lesson with Isaiah Simmons. Really great athletes who kind of are, what's the best position? Where are you going to play them? But hey, in this case, I have Jalen Walker going to Carolina. So that brings us to the Dallas Cowboys. Again, I can see them making a move for Ashton Jeanty. I could see them maybe drafting a running back here. I don't think what they've done in free agency is, precludes them from drafting a running back here. Wide receiver is in need. I don't see an outside wide receiver that you could draft here. Is Tyler Booker a guy that could go here? Donovan Jackson, that's probably a little high. Edge rusher, I think there's some really good value here at edge rusher. I'm like Green, Shamar Stewart, any of the other edge rushers. But in this case, they also have a really big need at linebacker. I don't think any of those free agents, like Kenneth Murray and those types, Jihad Campbell is an upgrade right away with him. I think you can play him in the middle. You can play him in the outside. You can blitz him. I think he's a do-it-all linebacker, and I still don't think you pass that up. even though positional value isn't great, like with linebackers, running backs, that kind of stuff. But I have the Dallas Cowboys going with linebacker Jihad Campbell. That puts the Miami Dolphins on the clock. Again, they need some offensive line help. They need safety help. Do you look at taking a tackle here? The top tackles are starting to already go off the board. You've had 3 of my 4 first-round graded tackles are off the board. Do you take Josh Simmons this early? Is there a guard worthy? Is Grace Zabel worth the 13th overall pick? Could you go with a tight end here? I know you've got Johnny Smith, but in this case, I'm looking at kind of looking through this and looking at weighing between Malachi Starks or Will Johnson. And in this case, I'll go with Malachi Starks. Doesn't have the injury concerns that we had last year. I think he's a really good stud player. So I think he solves some of your safety need that you're going to have. The 2 safeties they did sign, one of them, Ife Melifonwu, too much injury concern. I think you get Malachi Starks in there, and that improves the back end of your defense. So at pick 13, I have them going with Malachi Starks. Now at pick 14, this could be fun, right? You got the Colts. They really need a tight end. Do you go with the tight end here and the top one on the board and Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland? Do you look at edge rusher? You've got some guys here that are still sitting on the board. That was next tier of edge rushers: Mike Green, Shamar Stewart, Donovan Ezeraku. Do you go with corner or the linebacker just went off the board? The first safety just went off the board. So I think those kind of get pushed to the back burner. I don't think that they would make the move for a Nick Emmanwori. But in this case, I have them taking Jahadae Barron out of Texas. I think he just solidifies that secondary, the cornerback position, that makes them really good and really deep at the cornerback position. So I have the Indianapolis Colts at pick 14 going with Jahadae Barron. Now that brings me to pick 15. Looking at the board and where we're at right now, if there's teams back there, maybe in the second round, Cleveland, the Giants, or teams in the back half of the first round, maybe Seattle, right, looking for a long-term replacement for a Geno Smith, right? Pittsburgh, looking down at the draft board, the LA Rams, right? Do they like Sanders? This is a spot where I think, or maybe even with Indianapolis, this is the spots now we're starting to think of, okay, what teams would be willing to trade down and what teams would be willing to trade up. So in this case, if I'm Pittsburgh and I'm looking to trade up, you got Cincinnati sitting there at 17. Are they really going to trade with Pittsburgh to give them the quarterback of the future? So I think if Pittsburgh's going to move up, they would have to look to get ahead of Cincinnati, because if they don't, now you're going to be looking to trade. Will Seattle be willing to trade? Will Tampa Bay be willing to trade? And the farther you get down the draft board, the more you're going to have to worry. Will the Giants, will Cleveland, will other teams, will the Raiders pay the draft capital to move up into the draft board? So in this case, I had the Pittsburgh Steelers making a play and moving up with the Atlanta Falcons. And so Pittsburgh and Atlanta making a deal here. So Pittsburgh going to trade 21. Atlanta's going to trade 15. I had Pittsburgh also sending pick 83. I know that's going to leave them with a lot less draft capital here. And then I had them also sending next year's 4th round pick and then a pick swap here to help them move up the board from 185 in Atlanta, sending back 218 and then 242. So the pick swap, they move up from 218 to 185. So 218 and 242, and at the end of the draft, go from Atlanta to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh sends a 4th round pick this next year and their 3rd round pick in this year's draft to move up. That means Atlanta picks up some extra picks. So Pittsburgh moves up. I know that it's going to leave them with very little draft capital after already picking up DK Metcalf, but who knows who their quarterback is going to be? Will it really be Aaron Rodgers? Are they going to go in the season with Mason Rudolph? I just can't see that. So I have Pittsburgh moving up the draft board, really using draft picks to get current players. And so with them moving up, I get quarterback. They draft Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback out of Colorado. That leaves the Arizona Cardinals on the clock. Arizona really has needs all on their defense. They have some needs on the interior of the offensive line. So you could look at Will Johnson. He would be a good play here. You have all of the top tier of the next defensive line that may be worthy of getting picked here in Kenneth Grant, Derek Harmon. I think it's a big reach for Darius Alexander. I could see Walter Nolan being drafted here. They don't need a player like Tyler Warren. Does a a Mike Green fit here? And in this exercise, I had them actually trading back. So I think Tampa Bay is in the need for some interior defenders or edge rushers. So in this scenario, Tampa Bay moves up. I think Jihad Campbell would be a great fit for them. He already got picked at 12. So I have Tampa Bay making a deal at 6, going from 19 to 16. I have them moving up for one particular player that I think would really be great for them to pair with Vita Vea, and that's Kenneth Grant. And if you're going to trade up for a Kenneth Grant, you're going to have to get, I think, ahead of Cincinnati. I think they're going to be looking on the interior of the defensive line. Frankly, I think Arizona could be here as well. But I have Tampa Bay moving up here. And Tampa Bay and the Arizona Cardinals making a swap. I don't remember if I wrote this down. So we're just going to have to do this on the fly here. So looking at the Rich Hill draft trade chart, what would Arizona and Tampa Bay have to do to move up that 3 picks? You're looking at a 305 to 278 difference, to about a 30-point difference. That's really looking at a high 4th round draft pick to move up that spot. And so at this case, all right, here. So we're going to go with Tampa Bay giving up pick 121 to move up there. Now, is that enough for them to get up? Pick 121 is 24 points. They'd need a little bit more to make it worth their while. And so in this case, they would have to also give up pick 157. So I have them giving up 4th and 5th round picks going to Arizona. That would be just about right on the draft trade chart. So I'm going to force this trade. Tampa Bay moves up. They're in the spot. They come up and they get Kenneth Grant to help with the interior of their defensive line. That puts Cincinnati on the clock, who desperately needs edge rushing, linebacker, defensive line. You could see them working at the interior of the offensive line as well. And then I think Cincinnati, they could go with the Mike Green here, Donovan Ezeraku. In this case, I think we start to see the defensive line run, and they go with Walter Nolan. Now that puts Seattle on the clock. They desperately need offensive line, but John Schneider is not a guy who likes to use draft capital early in the draft on interior offensive line. So where does Seattle go in this case? I think a player that would be great for them. They need some wide receiving help. They've traded away a lot, but you end up sitting here with one of the gems of the draft. One, I don't know if I call him a blue chip player, but he is a player at the tight end position that you really haven't seen in the NFL. A guy who can play all over the field, line him up in the slot, line him up outside, line him up at H-back. And Seattle goes with Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State. That puts us at pick 19 with the Arizona Cardinals, who are back on the clock here at pick 19. They trade down. They lose out on a couple of the interior guys, but yet they get to pick Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan, a guy who a lot of people think could be a top 10 corner. So they get some draft capital in the 4th and 5th round from Tampa Bay to move down 3 spots, and they pick up Will Johnson. Next up is the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, they filled a lot of needs. Very sneakily, they did fill a lot of needs in free agency. They're not left with the desperation of a lot of needs on their roster. You could argue they really, really need a running back. I could see a guy like Omarion Hampton going here. Another wide receiver. There's no centers I would consider taking here. But looking at Denver, who is the player that I have them taking here and looking at Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden? Does signing Evan Ingram as a free agent preclude you from taking Colston Loveland here? I don't necessarily think it does. I think if Tyler Warren was here, I think maybe you would see a more likelihood of Sean Payton and crew going with a player who they can use kind of as an offensive joker. But in this case, I had them say looking at wide receiver and taking Matthew Golden. That brings Atlanta on the board. Remember, they just traded down with Pittsburgh, so Pittsburgh could get Shedeur Sanders at quarterback. They picked up some extra picks here, and Atlanta still is sitting there with kind of the pick of the litter of this next kind of tier of edge rushers. And I think they'd be ecstatic to still be sitting here with Mike Green on the board and picking him. Seattle still needs wide receiving help. They desperately need help on the interior of that defensive line. They should use edge rushers, tight end. And this is just a perfect scenario for Jim Harbaugh as he gets to pick Michigan tight end Colston Loveland at pick 22. That gets me to the Green Bay Packers. I don't see Green Bay switching up and picking wide receiver here. I think corner could be a consideration here. Siobhan Ravel, Trey Amos, Maxwell Harrison. I could see those guys being in play here. But I look at Green Bay and going with Donovan Ezeraku. They go with an edge rusher. Maybe it doesn't fit their prototypical type of size, but I think he is a guy that he can just get after the quarterback, the familiarity there with the former Boston College head coach. So I like Donovan Ezeraku going to pick 23. That takes us to pick 24 with Minnesota. Minnesota is definitely going to be a team with the lack of draft capital that they have. They're going to be looking to trade down in this draft. Will they find a trade partner? Could they be looking to move all the way back for a team looking to get Jackson Dart? That's a very strong possibility here. But I had in this draft scenario that I ran through, I know that the Kansas City Chiefs signed a left tackle already. They're going to move Kinsey Sumayatia into the inside. But I think Minnesota looking to trade. Oh, and look, PFF agreed with me. I have them trading with the Kansas City Chiefs. So moving from pick 31 up to 24, Minnesota is going to get to recoup some draft capital here. And I had them, Kansas City, working this trade out, sending pick 95, and then sending a fourth-round pick, their own fourth-round pick in next year's draft, and pick 226 in this year's draft to move up. So they get a third-round pick, a fourth-round pick next year, and a late pick here, 226, to move up. I'm going to force this trade. Boom, Kansas City moves up again. Second year in a row, they move up, and they come up for Josh Simmons. So they move ahead of Houston, who a lot of teams know they're going to need interior offensive line help. So now you've seen a lot of the interior off the tackle class has been basically wiped out right in front of Houston. So what do? Are they going to sit here? Do they trade back? Did they take a Gray Zabel, Tyler Booker, Donovan Jackson? Or do they look at wide receiver? And I think it's set up on the draft board with the tackles gone. And is the value of guard here? And I think they go with pairing Emeka Egbuka back with CJ Stroud would be a fantastic, fun experiment to see the Houston Texans do. They've been decimated at injury and the departure of Stephon Diggs. So picking up Emeka Egbuka, if they can't pick up an offensive line there, I don't think the value is necessarily there. The only player I could see them doing is Gray Zabel. Is he ready to play day one? Maybe, maybe not. But I think in this case, let's see if they can get an offensive lineman in round 2 would be their philosophy in picking one of the best players on the board, and that's Emeka Egbuka for the Houston Texans. That takes us to the Los Angeles Rams. So they had a little drama here in the offseason with Matthew Stafford. I don't really think that was serious, that Matthew was really going to leave and they would end up in quarterback purgatory. But the Rams, the positions that they need here, the 2 tight ends are off the board. Are you going to take a tackle this early? I've mocked Josh Connerly Jr. here. I've mocked linebackers, Carson Schweshinger here. I've mocked other corners here. I honestly don't believe that the Rams really value linebacker that highly to pick one in the first round. I could be wrong, but in this case, I think the Rams are a perfect trade down candidate to pick up extra picks and not have to overdraft based on where they are and their needs. Now, could they take the best player available? Sure. I could see the Rams just going and whoever they have is the best player available doing just that. But in this case, I think they're a perfect pick for one of these teams in the back end of round 2 to move up. And I think that a perfect spot here for Cleveland or the New York Giants to move up in the draft. And so I think the Giants move from 34 to 26. They're going to come grab the third best quarterback in the draft. I think they're going to come up here for Jackson Dart. And so I have the Rams and the Giants making a deal. The New York Giants send pick 99. They also send pick 105 in this year's draft. And then they throw in a 5th round pick next year to the Rams. The Rams then give back, I have them giving back a pick 195 to the New York Giants. It's a little bit of an overpay, but that's kind of what you do when you move from the 2nd round into the 1st round to get a quarterback. And so the Rams move down. They move out of the 1st round. They pick up picks in the 4th round here. 3rd round at pick 99. And I think 105 is the first pick of the right in there. And yep, that pick in the 4th round. So we're going to go ahead and force this trade. Giants move up. And this is a home run scenario for the New York Giants. If they truly believe that Jackson Dart could develop into a starting NFL quarterback, you pick up Travis Hunter, the one-of-one talent in this draft. You still take a shot at Jackson Dart. They still have some draft capital left if they wanted to make another stab at one of these quarterbacks later in the draft. The Giants moving up to 26, which takes me to the Baltimore Ravens. And the Ravens could go anywhere. They could take the best player available. I could see them looking at like Nick Amenwari here. I could see them taking any of the corners here. But in this case, I think they do something that is just a typical Ravens thing to do and take Derek Harmon, the defensive lineman from the University of Oregon. I could see Shamar Stewart being in play here as well. That gets me to the Detroit Lions. Again, Lions will do what they think is the best player available on the board. Is that Shamar Stewart? Do they value him? Could I see him taking a Gray Zabel here? Yeah. Or a Donovan Jackson, Tyler Booker. Yeah. I think any of these positions are on the board for them. I think it's going to come down to where I think the board will also meet need in terms of best player available. I can't see the Lions if Shamar Stewart is sitting here on the board with his type of athletic ability and the coaching staff that the Lions have. If Shamar Stewart falls this far or even starts to fall down the draft boards, maybe they make a move up for him. So I have the Lions taking Shamar Stewart. That brings me to Washington. I could see Omarion Hampton here, another edge rusher. Do they like a James Pierce here? Do they make a move for a corner? And in my scenario, I really went back and forth making the move for the second running back. I do think Omarion Hampton's probably going to go in the 1st round. I just don't think the NFL has that big of a gap between him and Ashton Jeanty, though on the flip side, there are just so many running backs in this class. So in this case, I had them going with Gray Zabel and getting that center guard versatility out of the North Dakota State project there. That takes us to Buffalo. Buffalo has screaming needs at linebacker and in their secondary, especially at cornerback. And I think there's a corner out there who just pairs very well with what Buffalo likes to do, and that's Maxwell Harrison, the cornerback out of the University of Kentucky. Now that brings us to the Minnesota Vikings, who traded down from 24 to 31. Could Cleveland come up here and try to grab a quarterback if Jackson Dart was still on the board? Yeah, he is. But I think that, Cleveland or the Giants or the Raiders, I think you're going to see one of those teams move up for Jackson Dart. I think that's a really strong possibility that we will see at some point in this draft. I can't see Shedeur Sanders just keep falling down the draft board into the 20s and having Pittsburgh or someone else, grab him in the 20s. I think someone will trade up for Shedeur, or maybe if he doesn't get picked early. So in this case, Minnesota is back on the clock here. They made the trade down, and they have some needs in the defensive backfield. I could see a safety. Does Nick Emmanwori fit here if Malachi Starks was here? If he falls, I don't know if would they not trade down? Would they just pick Malachi Starks? Harrison Smith isn't going to be around forever. Interior of the defensive line, especially guys who can run stuff. They have some pass rushers along the defensive line as well. Running back, could Omarion Hampton be that guy? But they just got, you re-signed Aaron Jones. You brought in Mason from San Francisco. Now you've got two. Do you really want to spend first-round draft capital on another running back? So in this case, I have Minnesota going with a guy who I think will fit their system very well, an aggressive corner in Siobhan Revelle. And so I have the East Carolina product coming off the injury. But I don't think if he wouldn't have gotten injured, he would definitely be consideration for a top 15 pick in this draft. I really do like him. I think he's more set for his zone scheme as opposed to man-to-man, but I think he's aggressive. I think he would fit the Viking system very well. Now that leaves us to the Philadelphia Eagles, and for once, there isn't a superstar, potential superstar University of Georgia product falling all the way to them. So, where do they go here? Could they go wide receiver? Yeah, I think they could use a third wide receiver. I don't think that's the biggest screaming need. Guard. Do you look at a Tyler Booker? Does he fit their system? Gray Zable's off the board as Donovan Jackson. I think that'd be a really good pickup if you looked at it. A guy who can play guard and also play tackle. Some teams may see him as a tackle over guard. He filled in very well for Ohio State with the injury to Josh Simmons. Corner is a need. Do they take one here? Does a Troy Amos fit what they're looking for? Does a Azare Thomas fit what they're looking for? And in this case, I'm going to go with edge defender, right? Do you go with the Nick Scorton? I think that size could fit well for them. They can move him around the defensive line. Do you go with the speed? And I think they go and they get the speed of James Pierce Jr. And that's who we're going to draft here in a sec. But before we do that, we'll recap the draft of the Eagles taking James Pierce there. So let's recap. We have Cam Ward going 1, Abdul Carter going 2 to Cleveland, the Giants going with Travis Hunter. San Francisco on that trade up goes with Mason Graham, Ashton Jeanty to Chicago after trade up with Jacksonville in Chicago there. Ted McMillan going 6, Armand Membu going to the Jets at 7, Will Campbell going to the Pats at 8 after they traded down to 11, back up to 8. Michael Williams going to New Orleans, Calvin Banks Jr. going to Jacksonville, Jalen Walker going to Carolina after they traded back 3 spots with New England, Jihad Campbell to Dallas, Malachi Starks going to Miami, Jahade Barron, the cornerback out of Texas, going to Indianapolis, trade up between Pittsburgh and Atlanta, Shedeur Sanders going to the Steelers, trade up Tampa Bay, moving up to get Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan going to the Bengals, Tyler Warren falling all the way to 18 to Seattle, 19, Will Johnson to Arizona, Matthew Golden to Denver, Mike Green to the Falcons, Colston Loveland, perfect matchup with Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, Donovan Ezeraku to Green Bay. Trade up here, Kansas City traded with Minnesota to get tackle Josh Simmons. Perfect matchup here again with CJ Stroud and his former college teammate Emeka Buka. Giants trading up with the Rams to get Jackson Dart. Derek Harmon going to the Baltimore Ravens. Shamar Stewart going to the Detroit Lions. I don't know where Shamar is going to go. I really don't. I could see the teams just nabbing him in the top 10. I could see him falling all the way down to the back end of the first round here. Gray Zabel going to Washington. Maxwell Harrison, Siobhan Revelle. And last but not least, we're going to end this draft right here with James Pierce going to the Philadelphia Eagles. And so that is your draft. If you look right here, let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if I screwed up your team and you absolutely hate it, or if you loved it. Let me know in the comments. this is a fun little exercise. I don't really do these much with trades, but I do think trades are going to happen. It's hard to work out these trades on the fly by yourself with no one to talk this through. So I kind of worked it out beforehand, did this mock draft beforehand. One of these times I'm going to do one live, and that'll be a lot of fun as well. But don't forget to like the video, subscribe, share this with all of your friends. This is a fun little exercise, and hopefully I didn't screw up too badly for your team. So with that, have a great night.
The Draft Beard Podcast.